Loki and Sigyn, a love story. Young gods in love. By J.L. Butler. They once were children, playfully competitive. They would tease and wrestle one another like any brothers, anywhere. Thor excelled at all things physically challenging, his brother, Loki, at things more intellectual and metaphysical. Thor, even as a young child, was heavier and stronger than Loki. Loki, a bit younger, was built more like a sprinter, wiry and agile like a cat. Odin seemed to favor his elder son. He would often take Thor with him on hunting trips, while Loki stayed behind with his mother and his tutor, Sýr. Sýr was in fact a practitioner of magic. She loved her bright little student Loki, and taught him harmless tricks such as levitation and movement of small objects, like tableware and cups. The children marked their birthdays according to the calendar of Midgard, or the sister realm of Midgard, also known as Earth. They aged much more slowly than Earth's native inhabitants. They were in fact hundreds of years old measured in Earth years, while appearing only 10 or 12 in Asgard. One day, a new student entered the classroom of Thor, Loki, and Sýr. A young girl, the same age as Loki, came to learn from Sýr. She was a distant cousin of Odin, and had shown some mystical abilities herself. Her magic was bound to her voice. She could bend anyone to her will by simply singing a little song, telling them what she wanted. Her influence seemed to affect only those outside of the royal family. Her sweet voice had no effect on either Thor or Loki, though Loki would often ask her to try, and then gaze dreamily at her as she sang verse after ineffectual verse, only to finally stop, being quite vexed with him indeed. This was Sigyn, a native of Vanaheim, one of the sister realms of Asgard. Sigyn's father, Aranir, was a distant cousin to King Odin. Odin's wife, Frigga, generously offered for Sigyn to be tutored along with her sons, hoping that her influence might tame the rowdy young boys. Thor seemed quite bored with her in all things he considered girlish, but Loki was very taken with her. She seemed only tolerant of him, but the two soon became inseparable. Unbeknownst to the children, these were in fact dark days for Asgard. Fingardine, a half-mortal who controlled a large and powerful realm on the planet Earth, had formed a loose alliance with the frost giants of Jotunheim. The frost giants were no friends to Odin and Asgard, and had been held in check only because the two realms were very equally matched. Fingardine's powers were quite weak, but what he lacked in magical power was made up for in heavy metal. He had accumulated an enormous arsenal of elven weapons, mostly acquired through the trade of human slaves to work the elven mines and factories. Odin wished to keep his potential enemy, Fingardine, close. He orchestrated a great feast to celebrate Fingardine's 300th birthday. For an immortal, 300 years was not old at all, but Fingardine was half-mortal, and beginning to show his age. Fingardine arrived at the gates of Asgard with an entourage of 500 of his closest friends. He and his half-blood friends were brutes. Their wretched smell, body odor, dead meat, and ale preceded them by a mile. They were loud and ill-mannered, and showed a complete disrespect towards their host and hostess. During the brief 3-day course of their stay, dozens of serving girls were raped, and at least 3 Asgardians were found beaten to death in alleyways. It was all Odin could do to keep his men, and himself, from slaughtering these disgusting pigmen. he had to constantly remind himself that he had to remain friendly with Fingardine and his weapon-laden realm if he were to avoid a war with Jotunheim. As Fingardine was burping and farting his farewells to Odin, he spotted the maiden Sigyn. Though still a young girl, Sigyn showed every sign of becoming a great beauty. "And who owns that little wench?" he asked Odin. "We have no slaves here, Fingardine. That girl is my cousin Ironir's only child, Sigyn. She is here in Asgard to study with my sons, Thor and Loki." Odin despised this man, watching as actual drool rolled from the corner of his mouth as he leered at the little girl. "Your cousin, eh? Then, as a member of the royal family to Odin, if she were to wed, say, a member of the royal family of Fingardine, then the two families would be bound in fealty forever, wouldn't they?" An evil smile crept across the hideous old man's face. Odin tried to hide his disgust. "A girl so young may not wed in this realm, Fingardine, even with parental consent. This royal family member you speak of should look elsewhere for a bride, I think." Fingardine's face darkened. Of course, but she may wed as soon as she enters womanhood in these parts, may she not? With parental permission, I mean." He knotted his hands together, continuing to stare at the girl. "And what father wouldn't give up one child for the safety of millions?" The sly grin was back. Odin's heart sank. He couldn't imagine condemning any poor girl to such a fate, much less the charming little Sigyn, but Fingardine was right. The sacrifice of this one girl could ensure peace throughout the 9 realms for as long as one of her descendants sat upon the throne of Scandia. Besides, how much longer could this creature go on living, anyway? It would be some years before Sigyn came of age, even if...